Hey YouTube, Ethan here. Today we're going to be looking at metal volcanoes in oxygen not included and the best way to tame them. I'm specifically going to be focusing on copper, iron, and gold volcanoes, but you can apply these techniques to pretty much any volcano in the game, including the spaced out DLC volcanoes, as long as you consider the different temperatures that you'll be dealing with in those other volcanoes. Now, this tutorial will be specifically aimed towards beginners. Therefore, I'm not going to go into overly complicated advice and overly complicated mathematics that can be applied to making the volcanoes super efficient or super optimized in the way that they're built. I'm going to be focusing specifically on making sure that you know how to tame any of the base game metal volcanoes and that you know how to do it safely and efficiently to succeed in your colony. I'm going to go over the builds that I use when I tame my metal volcanoes, and I'm going to try to make them as beginner friendly as possible. We're going to look at multiple strategies and multiple iterations of the same strategy that is going to help you tame your metal volcanoes. The builds that we're going to make will get progressively harder and more complicated. I'll try to do it in a way that builds upon one another, so you get to see the steps on how to get to the final product to make your build as efficient as possible. So to start things off, one of the biggest problems that we're going to be dealing with when it comes to any volcano is the heat. As you can see, this iron volcano produces molten iron at 2500 degrees Celsius. This is way too hot to have it exposed to our base or our colony. We want to keep this volcano in a controlled environment so this heat doesn't get out to the rest of our base that could potentially cause us to lose the game. But we also want a way to convert this molten iron into usable iron and be able to move it around our base without taking that heat with us. So with that, let's get into it. One of the first things that I'll be showing you is how to identify volcanoes or even geysers on your asteroid in oxygen not included. So I'm going to be using sandbox mode just to make this process a little bit quicker. But if you're playing the game organically, you're going to eventually come across these neutronomium tiles that look like this. They are always 4 tiles horizontal and 1 tile high. And if you were to zoom out, they are very easy to find using the temperature overlay because they always appear to be very cold. So we have one here. We have one up here that's already exposed. We have neutronomium here. We have neutronomium down here. And we have some neutronomium over here. So they're always going to appear to be very cold relative to their surrounding areas. Now, there's a very easy strategy on how you can identify exactly what type of geyser or volcano this is without ever digging it up. Select your priority menu and click on top priority. That's the alert button. Simply drag it over whatever neutronomium tiles you have found, and the yellow alert will tell you exactly what this volcano or geyser is. In this case, we have found a cool slush geyser. Once you identify what it is, you can remove the alert by changing the priority back down to whatever level you wish. I always put it as level 1, so I know that it's a volcano or geyser that I have just found. So here's another one. You can see I've already found this, but we're going to show it again. This is a steam vent. This is a really good way to find out exactly what you're dealing with before you dig it up. Upon finding neutronomium tiles, I will begin to build around it with insulated tiles and block it off. I'm going to use the brush tool to simulate my duplicants digging this out. And as you can see, when you uncover parts of it, you'll actually see the geyser itself. This is a water geyser. Right now it is idle. And if I want to use this in the future, I may want to analyze it first. I'll just simply seal it off and wait for the geyser or volcano to go dormant until my duplicants can safely analyze it. When it's partially covered like this, the geyser or volcano will not erupt. So you can safely leave it uncovered and keep an eye on it to check if it's dormant or not. Once I notice that it has gone dormant, I'll have my duplicants dig it out, at which point they can analyze it and I can begin my build to tame it. So now that we've figured out the basic strategies on uncovering geysers and volcanoes, identifying them and digging them out, let's jump into how to tame your metal volcanoes. So this is probably the easiest method that you can use to collect gold from the gold volcano. This is not sustainable by any means, so only use this method if you desperately need the gold and you don't mind the insane heat transfer that this is going to produce. As you can see, I'm using the automatic dispenser, and I have a little bit of sand right here that I'm going to get my duplicants to dig up. The automatic dispenser is set to accept sand. You can use sand and drop it into the gold volcano chamber. This is going to instantly cool the molten gold. Over the course of time, the molten gold will turn into refined gold, as you can see, and you'll be able to use it. The reason why this is not sustainable is because as soon as this gold volcano starts to erupt, the surrounding area will be scalding. As you can see, this is already heating up quite a bit. If you're early on in the game, you may only have copper ore available to build the automatic dispenser, and eventually this will overheat. So it's a very manual intensive method. You'd have to constantly close this gap to prevent the heat from escaping, and you would somehow have to get in here to retrieve this gold. This gold is going to be extremely hot. Right now it's almost 1000 degrees Celsius. So anything that you use to build with this gold inside your base is going to get very hot as well. And it's going to heat up your base rapidly, which you don't want, especially in the early game. This is the easiest method to retrieve the molten gold as refined gold from your gold volcano. This method will also work for iron and copper volcanoes. However, it is very obvious why this method is not recommended unless you desperately need to use that material. So let's move on to something better. This is the most basic setup for taming a gold volcano. It involves building a chamber around your gold volcano and using a gas pump to vacuum it out completely. This is mostly necessary in case we have trapped gases like chlorine, natural gas, or carbon dioxide. We only want oxygen or steam inside this room. Also, ideally, you would do this when the gold volcano is dormant, because at this stage in the game, you may not have access to steel for your gas pump, and you'll melt the gas pump. Once you have it sufficiently vacuumed out, and like I said, you don't have to go all the way down to vacuum, the important thing is that there's no lingering gases in here other than oxygen. Once that has been accomplished, you can delete your gas pump as it's no longer needed. You'll want to use a liquid lock to prevent gases from coming in here, as any sort of door will still allow gases to pass through. Also, it's worth noting to build your liquid lock out of something like crude oil that will not evaporate once this gold volcano is going off. If you build your liquid lock out of water, it will simply evaporate into steam and you'll lose the lock entirely. So once your room is vacuumed out sufficiently, or you only have oxygen left, you want to fill it with water. You can do this in multiple ways. My favorite way is to simply add a liquid bridge into the spout that comes out of the steam turbine and use this to introduce water into your chamber that your gold volcano is in. Alternatively, you could use a water bottle emptier as well. This is going to entirely depend on your base and where your nearest water source is from. If it's very far away, a bottle emptier may be easier. The amount of water that you fill it with will vary depending on how large you built your chamber. However, keep in mind that as a rule of thumb, it's always easier to add more water if you do not have a sufficient amount of it to convert into steam, rather than trying to delete water that has turned into steam. So I'm going to artificially introduce the steam into this chamber to show you what's going to happen when the volcano is running at its full capacity. The volcano will turn the water into steam, and the steam turbine will simply delete the heat that is produced. Long term, this method will eventually cool your gold right down to about 100 degrees Celsius. The steam will condense back into water. As you can see, the temperature is going down. And likewise, the refined gold will also go down in temperature to about 100 degrees Celsius. Just using this method alone with a steam turbine, a room that is vacuumed out, and a liquid lock will give you gold that is now much cooler than previously using the sand method. As you can see, once it starts erupting, more steam is generated, and the steam turbine will delete the heat. If we continue to let this run, the gold will eventually make its way back to about 100 degrees Celsius. Even still at 100 degrees, this gold will be too hot to use in your base. It will heat up critters and nearby farms rapidly, so we need to figure out a method to get it even cooler than this. But you can see how powerful the steam turbine is on its own. Here's the plumbing overlay and the electrical overlay. But we can do better. Let's move on to something new. So now we have an upgraded method from simply letting the steam turbine run on its own. Here we're going to actively cool the steam turbine so it does not overheat, and we're going to be doing that using an aqua tuner. Because the aqua tuner is made out of steel, it will be able to withstand the heat that's generated from the gold volcano, and it will also actively be cooled by the steam turbine. The only problem is, how do we get the water in the liquid that will be cooling the steam turbine? We're going to have to prime this liquid pipe. I'm going to be using regular water for this method to show you how it works. You want to create a loop inside of your chamber where your gold volcano is, with radiant pipes passing over your steam turbine. Now that we have the majority of our liquid coming in at around 15 degrees Celsius, we want to let it bypass the aqua tuner so it is not cooling even farther and freezing inside the pipes, which will cause the system to break. We can use the liquid pipe thermosensor for this. And this is the automation. I've set this to only send a green signal if the temperature inside of the pipes is over 16 degrees. Different liquids such as crude oil and polluted water will have much different freezing temperatures. Different liquids also have different levels of heat capacity, which will affect how well they're able to cool. This liquid bridge is in place to keep the water flowing in the correct direction. Watch what happens if we delete this liquid bridge and add in regular pipe. I've deleted the liquid bridge and you can see that the water has immediately stopped flowing. This is because there is now a conflicting path for the water to take. Both directions of the pipe are now trying to get to this inlet on the aqua tuner. This is why it is important to use a bridge to keep the water flowing in the correct direction. This is a great method to use to keep the steam turbine from overheating and to continuously cool the gold that you want to use. So here's our overlay for the plumbing, the automation, and the power. But let's use this method and make it even better. Let's figure out a way to actively cool the gold that is coming out from the gold volcano. This is a much more advanced method than before. Here we're using a lot more steel. We've installed an auto sweeper made out of steel and a conveyor loader also made out of steel. Let's take a look at what's going on. We've expanded the cooling loop from our previous layout to include metal tiles at the bottom. The water will pass by to cool down the steam turbine, and then it will also pass by these metal tiles. If we take a look at our temperature overlay screen, this metal tile is extremely cold thanks to the radiant liquid pipes that I had running over them. I'm also running the conveyor belt right through these metal tiles. So any contents that are being transferred through this conveyor rail will also become very cold. At the end, I have a conveyor rail thermosensor. This is set to send a green signal only if the detected temperatures on the conveyor rail are below 20 degrees Celsius. If they are above 20 degrees Celsius, it will send the red signal and close the chute. When I turn on my conveyor loader, it's going to pick up the 244 degrees refined gold, and it will run through the conveyor rail. The metal tiles will exchange heat with the radiant pipes and the solids that are on the conveyor rail. And if it gets to the end, to the thermal sensor, and it is still above 20 degrees Celsius, it will keep the chute closed. This method will only allow gold that is at or below 20 degrees Celsius to be deposited for my duplicants to use. So let's see it in action. You can see the gold is entering at 230 degrees Celsius. As soon as it reaches the metal tiles, it starts to cool down instantly. You can see the initial gold that passes through is very cold, and it is completely usable within our base at 14 degrees. However, as the metal tiles start to fall behind in cooling of the gold, the chute will eventually close, and it will not allow any more gold to pass through until it is sufficiently cooled. Let's keep watching and take a look. Okay, we've just had the conveyor rail thermosensor put a stop to our gold, and you can see the gold right now is just over 20 degrees, and as soon as that reaches 20 or below, it's going to allow the rest of the gold to come through the chute. And there you have it. You have 17 degrees gold that is usable anywhere within your base. So now that we've seen this setup work in sandbox mode, let's take a look at a real-world example. This is an example of the setup being used on my Regrettable Burrow playthrough where I'm at cycle 741. Now this setup has gone through a lot of chaos. There's saltwater, polluted water, and just in general, a bunch of random things happening. But the concept and the functionality remains exactly the same. So let's take a look at our conveyor loader. Right now it is filled with gold amalgam at the start. In this case, I have my green signal to turn on when my temperature of whatever is on the conveyor rail at 21 degrees Celsius. I have 2 stacks of 48 tons of gold sitting underneath this conveyor chute at just under 10 degrees Celsius. And you can see how the heating is doing. Let's take a look at the plumbing for this setup. Although the plumbing looks a little bit more complicated, it is generally the exact same concept. You could take this one step farther and have the conveyor rail circulate inside the steam room, which will help cool the contents of it. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there's always room for improvements. So let's take a look at an iron volcano in this exact same build. So here's the exact same setup for an iron volcano. As you can see, the conveyor rail zigzags through the metal tiles, which are made of gold. And right now, the system is extremely cool because the iron volcano is dormant. Here's the plumbing overlay, and in this case I'm using crude oil. I have another gold volcano on this exact same asteroid. And again, the conveyor rail zigzags through the metal tiles, which are extremely cold right now due to it being dormant. Here's the plumbing overlay and the conveyor overlay. I hope that this video is helpful for you. If you liked it, please leave me a like, and if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. I hope that you can use these tips and strategies to tame your metal volcanoes on your asteroids. So that's it for this video, and I'll talk to you guys next time.